Hello, fam, and welcome to another episode of My Idaho Friends. I am your host, Jaime Lima, and as always, coming to you live from Argos Productions studio via Argos Stream. Huge shout out, as always, to the Argos Production team, Justin, Erica, sweet baby James out in the back, making sure that everything's working and going smoothly and just fine. Before we get started, as usual, a couple of shout outs. Big shout outs to our one and only sponsor, Vital Elements, CBD products over here, local, and yes, with the exception of the farm. I get that. That's across the border. But everything else is from here. So if you're in need of CBD products, please hit up the link for My Idaho Friends. You can find it on our Facebook page. You can find it also on our YouTube channel as well. Oh boy, you guys, today I am so very excited, because I'm never not excited. I get to have a really cool conversation with Sarah Sentilles. Sarah is an author, and she's also involved on a very cool nonprofit that I'm also very proud to be a part of. And I'm not going to steal any of her thunder, theacious, the thunders. So without further ado, let's give her a nice My Idaho Friends welcome. Hello, Sarah. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Hi, Jaime. Thank you for having me here. I'm so happy to get to talk to you today.
Yeah, me too. And thank you for accommodating the virtual setup. So we would have loved to have you here at the studio, but you are out of Haley, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep, correct.
we're all over here, and I guess one of the good things is like if you were here, we would have had to wear a mask, which is fine. But this just gives us at least we can see you, we can see your beautiful smile. So thank you for making the time to be here. We certainly appreciate it. So yeah, hi.
Hi.
I hope you don't mind. I brought something to drink. So let's get started. We're gonna have a really good time. There's so many things that I want to cover with you, but before we get to what we're doing, excuse me, what you're doing right now, and what you're going to be doing in the near and the far future, I want us to take us to a little bit of a journey, and I like to always narrow it down to about 10 years ago. So with our guests. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who you are, and then tell us. Let's get started with the 10 years ago. Where was Sarah Sentilles at that time?
10 years ago. It's weird to think about. Let's see. So before 10 years ago, I grew up in Texas. I ended up going to college on the East Coast. I was an elementary school teacher in Compton, California after that, and then decided that I wanted to be an Episcopal priest. Um, and went to divinity school, then realized that wasn't what I wanted to do and started writing. But ten years ago, 2010, I was living in, where was I living 10 years ago? I think I might have been living in Tahoe, California at the time. I'd been a professor in other parts of California, in Southern California, and my husband and I left being professors and tried to figure out what might come next for us. And then soon after that, we moved to Portland. So in 2011, I moved to Portland, and I was an adjunct professor. I taught at Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland. I taught critical theory to visual artists. I love working with artists. So I started doing that in 2011 and taught around Portland, mostly at PNCA for about 5 years until I ended up moving to Haley, Idaho, which is where I live now.
Wow, cool. So, Professor Todd, so the whole family is in academia. How did that get started? Where do you guys go to school at?
I went to undergrad at Yale and I studied literature and art history there. And then I went to Harvard for divinity school and got a master's in divinity. And then realized I wasn't ever going to be an Episcopal priest. I was trying to become an Episcopal priest around 2001 after 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
when the whole country was really taking a turn towards conservatism. And it was hard enough already being a woman in Christianity trying to be a leader in the church, and it got even harder to try to be a progressive woman, feminist in the church. So I didn't really fit very well. And I decided that, well, if I wasn't going to be a priest, then I wanted to know everything there was to know about theology and the ways that people had thought about God. So I ended up getting a doctorate in the study of theology also at Harvard. And I was writing a dissertation on theological imagination, on the idea that you have to be able to imagine a better world before you can help bring that world into being. When the torture photographs taken at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq were made public, and people were referring to them as crucifixion images. And I wanted to know why that narrative of salvific violence was being imposed on the bodies of men who were being tortured, most of whom were Muslim. So I changed my dissertation topic and started writing about photography and narratives of violence and what our responsibility is when we see pictures of other people in pain. And that kind of set off the trajectory for the rest of my life after that.
Wow. I'm so glad that I asked that question. I had
I'm
no
weirder
idea.
than you knew. I'm weirder than you knew.
No, but that's pretty intense, and that, is when you were looking at the timeline, that takes, a great deal of conviction, because I'm sure, uh, I don't know that I want to put it so much as like on the inside a conservative box, but that's at the very, like, right in smack in the middle of, the country just coming, not, well, already being wrapped up together with this like narrative, like us against them. um and me myself, this is not about me, but my experiences as a Marine, and being deployed multiple times, it really, it's interesting to me, because I don't think anybody was probably just jumping at the bit of like going down that rabbit hole of like, how does this imagery affect, or points of view, and how is this information gonna give somebody else, a perspective as to what's actually happening. I mean, now of course we have the, I shouldn't say the comfort, the privilege of time. We fast forward, and of course, none of what was happening, what was right, and none of it. That's not how we are supposed to be treating people, and we hold ourselves to a very, very high standard. Even if, other countries that we might be in conflict with or in combat, will do that, to us. So it's a very weird, tricky thing, because I would, well, it's not that I would imagine. I remember that, it's all about, the us versus them rhetoric. So it was probably rather challenging for you to not only be writing about it, but then explaining what you were writing about, and having to, I don't know if I want to use the word defend it, but perhaps going to further detail as to where this point of view is coming from and why it is important.
Yeah, it was a very intense experience. I mean, I had the same advisor for several years, and he stopped being my advisor when I switched my dissertation topic. I don't think because he necessarily opposed what I was writing about, but didn't think it was an appropriate topic to be writing about for my dissertation. But
Right.
the real change for me came when I was finishing my dissertation while I was teaching at Cal State University Channel Islands, which is one of the newest CSUs in California. And I was actually teaching about ethics and aesthetics and about visual culture and critical theory. And one of my students happened to have been deployed at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, and he had guarded those prisoners that I had been writing about. He replaced the soldiers who were in those photographs. And meeting him was actually the most transformative experience of my life, because he was an artist. He was painting portraits of the people that he had guarded in
Mm-hmm.
that detention center, and people who had been tortured in that detention center. And he was also a college student who had joined the military to get enough money to go to school. And so I've been thinking about this idea abstractly, like what is our responsibility when we see images of violence? But now I had to ask myself, what is my responsibility as a university professor, as a college professor who has students in her classroom who have to go to war in order to have enough money to go to school? How does that require me to think differently about what it means to be a professor, about what higher education means, about what my complicity is in war, about what we're asking people to do? And I got to see the aftermath in his life of what being at war looked like, and it was intense. So I'm just grateful to him, and I ended up writing about him in my book called Draw Your Weapons. I call him Miles in the book, but he's one of the main characters in that story, and it talks about that. What difference can art make? What are our responsibilities as people living in the United States, sending people to war like you? And what is required of me as a citizen and as a thinker and as a professor and as a writer in response.
Whew. Wow. Sorry, thank you for sharing that. That's quite the onion to peel. I didn't think we were gonna get started that way. This was highly unexpected. That's what I get for not reading all your books prior to having this interview.
Yeah, that's what happened.
So, this is my fault. Tell us a little bit about, as we're moving now towards the now, and thank you for sharing that, by the way. And gosh, I think we might have to dive back into that. But so that was one of your books. You have been published now how many times?
I published 4 books, and I have a 5th book coming out in May.
Okay, so just talk to us a little bit about your first 4 books before we dive into the now and the current book that you're writing. If you can just kind of share with us a little bit about that, please.
Sure. My first book is called Taught by America, and it talks about teaching in Compton, California, teaching elementary school. I taught 1st and 2nd grade in a bilingual classroom, self-contained bilingual classroom. And as a white American who grew up with money and privilege, it was embarrassingly, my exposure to structural racism and systemic poverty, and made me question everything I've been told about myself and what it meant to have gone to Yale, what it meant to be smart, what it meant to be successful. In my classroom, I had 36 first grade students in my classroom, mostly Black and brown. I had 1 white student, and my classroom had no books. We had a ceiling that was collapsing, that had tiles that were covered in asbestos. We had no playground. We had no windows that opened. They were extremely bright, amazing, loving, fun, kind people. And from the very beginning, they were being set up for failure. They were being harmed by the very system that had been designed to help me. So that was my awakening as a white person to structural and systemic racism. And it called me to live differently in the world and to figure out what I wanted to do in response to that. So that's the subject of my first book. My second book is called A Church of Her Own. And I interview a bunch of women like me who tried to be leaders in churches and experienced tremendous sexism and racism in that process. So that's that second book. My third book is called Breaking Up with God, a love story, which is about my decision to walk away from being ordained as a priest. And then my 4th book is called Draw Your Weapons, which is about Miles, the student I talked about earlier, and about a conscientious objector during World War II who was put in prison for refusal to fight and for a refusal to report to the work camps that conscientious objectors are supposed to go to. And while he was in prison, he built a violin in the prison's woodshop. And I saw a photograph of him decades later when his grandson completed that violin and gave it to him on his birthday. And I just saw a photograph of him in the Boston Globe. And everything in my body said, you have to know this person, you have to interview him, you have to write about him. So I traveled and met him and became friends with his family and one of his daughters. So his name is Howard, and his daughter's name is Kayleen. And Howard and Miles are kind of these 2 people, a conscientious objector and a soldier, both of them artists, both of them trying to figure out how to live in the world in the face of tremendous suffering. And so that book is about what difference images might make and what people can do to stop violence that feels like it can't be stopped.
Whew. All right, so that's quite a bit of storytelling right there.
I like to keep it light,
Yeah, just some light reading. It's just like here's a feel-good story. Just sit around the fire. No, but that's good. That those are the kind of stories that create impactful conversations, and they're the ones that trigger at those not just impactful, but at times very difficult conversations that can, drive significant change when people have compassion for each other and are able to be respectful as they discuss such heavy topics. That's pretty awesome. And man, that's what we were doing then. But now we have a book that we're working on right now. I say we, and you are. Excuse me. I I can barely write a haiku. I don't even know how to spell haiku. But I also I want to be respectful because I know it's close and dear to your heart. So you let me know how much I can ask and how much I cannot ask, because just like the previous books, it's also, again, impactful storytelling, but it can also weigh heavy.
I'm happy to talk about it. It's my life right now, so I'm comfortable with it. But the my next book that's coming out in May, it's actually coming out on National Foster Care Day on May 4th, and it's coming out the week right before Mother's Day. It's called Stranger Care, a memoir of loving what isn't ours, and it's going to be published by Random House. And it tells the story of my husband and I, Eric, his name, choosing not to have a biological child and deciding to grow our family by becoming foster parents. And it tells the story of becoming a foster mother to a 3-day-old baby girl and bringing her home, and then what happens after that. So it's really a book it's my most personal book I've ever written. And it asks what the world might look like if we chose to live as if we were all related, as if we were all family, all kin. Would we live differently if we thought of strangers as our relatives, if we thought of trees as our relatives, if we thought of whales and stones and mountains and enemies as people that we were somehow, or beings we're somehow responsible for. So that's what that book is about. And stranger care is what Eric and I were called in the foster care system. We're called non-relative care providers, or stranger care. So I wanted to really think through, what does that look like to care for the stranger, and who is the stranger in this particular story.
Whew. Wow. With how did that journey started? Because I'm not entirely too familiar with with foster care, the adoption process. If you were to consume popular culture media, pop media, it will seem that it's at times probably even easier to adopt a child from a foreign country than to adopt a child here from the U.S. What made you guys as a family decide that you were gonna enter the foster care system here and and bring a child into your life here, as to like doing it from somewhere else?
Well, in the United States, there are 500,000 children in the foster care system on any given day, 500,000 children. And many of those people are living with stranger care, with non-relative care providers like Eric and me. Many of them will return to their families. They'll only be in foster care for a temporary period of time. But 100,000 right now are available for adoption, and they're mostly older kids. So Eric and I came to the decision about adoption for different reasons. For Eric, he's an environmentalist, and he didn't want to create another human being, another American human being. He wanted to give a child to a home. He wanted to give a home to a child that needed one, that already existed. He didn't see the point, and if there's all these kids that already need homes, why would we make a new one? But I wanted to have a baby. I thought I wanted to have a baby. And so I had to really think about, like, well, what does that mean to be married to someone who doesn't want to have a baby? So I thought about it. I went to therapy about it. And eventually I realized, well, it wasn't being pregnant that was important to me. That didn't really matter to me. What mattered was being a mother. And I didn't need to have a baby. I wanted to be a parent. I didn't. And that felt like all of a sudden, like, well, of course, why hadn't I thought about this before? But the reason we pursued foster care was actually kind of ignorant on our part. We hadn't done a lot of research. We knew that there were 500,000 children in foster care. We figured it would be easy and pretty common to be able to give a child a permanent home. A lot of kids in foster care are moved from home to home to home to home to home to home, and it causes a lot of trauma for them. So we thought that being a foster family who was willing to be a permanent home for a child who needed one might be a useful thing to be. But it proved much more complicated than that. I think we really underestimated the immediate attachment that happened when we brought this 3-day-old baby girl home. We were madly in love with her. And we underestimated how often Idaho reunifies. The national statistic for foster kids being reunified with their biological family is around 50%. In Idaho, it's over 75%. So the goal of foster care in Idaho is reunification, often at the cost to the child. So we didn't know either of those things when we went into it. I'm not sure we would have made a different choice, but we definitely learned by doing.
Okay, so to the untrained ear, such as I, so national rate 50% of reunification, 75% here in Idaho. For somebody that's not very familiar with the foster care system and the process of trying to adopt a child, it would seem that perhaps family reunification will be a good thing. But then you mentioned at the cost of the child, meaning perhaps at times, or I don't know what that number, I don't know that you know that or not, but what the data says, but perhaps that might not be the best thing for the child, even though that's what it's happening here statewide at such a high rate. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, the foster care system and adoption in the United States has a very racist history. You can think of Indian schools where Native Americans were taken from their parents and brought taken from their families and sent to these boarding schools where they were forced to dress differently. They weren't allowed to speak their native languages, and often they didn't see their families again. Or you can think about African American children stolen off the streets of New York City during the period of slavery and sold to the South. And that kind of racism remains in our system, where if you're a Black child, you're highly more likely to be taken from your parent for no reason, and you're less likely to be returned to them, and you're more likely to be abused by the people that are there supposedly to help you. So it's really complicated. Our foster daughter was white, so it's a little bit different in terms of the ways that racism was affecting it, but definitely classism affects the system. The people whose children are taken are often very poor. They're often struggling with addiction. So many systems have failed by the time that a child gets into foster care. It has to be a situation where they don't have any other family that could care for that child. So I don't want to live in a country where we take people's children and we don't return them because they're too poor, or they're too gay, or they're too Black, or they're too feminist, or they're too atheist, or too whatever we decide does not make a good parent. I think there's a huge danger in that. And child protective systems all over the country have a lot of power that is often unchecked. So reunification, yes, should be the goal. The goal should be supporting families to stay together. But sometimes I feel like it has swung back too far the other direction. And when reunification is the only goal, then, for example, in our foster daughter's case, when she was reunified with her biological mother, all the supports that the mother had while the foster daughter was in our care disappeared. So all of a sudden she doesn't have mentoring. She doesn't have social workers checking on her. She doesn't have access to free classes. She doesn't have job support. She's on her own. So the moment reunification happens, all the supports are cut off. Well, that doesn't really help anyone. So I think the entire system needs to be reimagined. And in my experience, the foster children in our country are the most vulnerable people that we live in this country with. And I think the pandemic has shown that as a country, we don't take care of the vulnerable. We don't understand that as what it means to be a contributing member of our society. We don't think that
Yeah.
care extends to others. And I think that that is evident in the way that the foster care system is designed and the way it works. By the time people enter it, so many systems have failed. I think it's not reasonable to expect it to solve everything, but I don't think in every case reunification is the right answer for the child in question.
Okay. Couple of questions on all of that, and thank you for sharing again, Sarah. Um, so, what I'm hearing is then that there are systems in place. Once the child or children enter the foster care in system, in which yes, the goal is reunification. So there's going to be some sort of support system for the parent, whether that might be with employment assistance, or that might be with mentoring, as you mentioned, or that might be with substance addiction, and whatnot. But then what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when reunification does happen, and you could argue that perhaps that's when the support is needed most, the support is then taken away because the goal all along was reunification. Check on the box. We did our job. You got it. You're good.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And because you have these underfunded, under-resourced departments of child welfare, the goal is to clear your caseload. And so reunification allows you to do that. And it's not necessarily the fault of the social workers. These are human beings who have big hearts and who went into this work because they want to make a difference and they want to protect children. But what they see on a daily basis is so traumatic. I mean, they see the worst that we do to one another, and it's the worst that we do, and it's being done to children. That in some ways they have to kind of, set that aside, set their hearts aside. In my experience, the social workers that I knew were very traumatized people who weren't getting the supports that they needed either. So, in an overworked, underfunded system, of course, you're going to end up doing what protects the system itself, what protects your time, what protects your heart, and not necessarily what protects children best.
Right. And especially when it's underfunded. I mean, off the top of my head, I think of Family Advocates, which is an organization that is there to to speak you know to those who are most vulnerable in a situation like that, which would be the children. And at times, more often than not, unfortunately, they come from this terrible family situations in which there was been a great deal of abuse, and through their programs, both reactive and proactive, they try to make a change, but it's just it seems to be a drop in the bucket. And of course, that drop means a whole lot to those that can be helped, but then like the rest is just like when you look from the outside in, it can be very disheartening. And I cannot imagine being on that line of work for a long period of time. I just do not believe. I don't want you to give up too much of the story. I want people to experience that the way that you want them to experience it, which is through your book. um, this is a very um, gosh, it's such a heavy journey. What has changed for you since this all started? I mean, there's always the most obvious in which like, oh, we're friends, and we're gonna help, and you didn't think about making an immediate bond with this brand new tiny human, and now here we are, which I can only imagine. I don't know what that looks like, but it probably it smells of legal everywhere, and 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 legal also means costly, and not everybody has the means for that too, which can be then even that much more frustrating for a whole lot of people. So with that, I guess me being Captain Obvious and um, talking too much, I just want to know what has changed for you and your husband since all started.
Um, I think I think there's a few things. One is, before I became a parent, people would say to me that the love that they felt for their children was unlike any love they'd ever felt, and I felt like it framed non-parents as deficient in some way. But when we welcomed our foster daughter home, I definitely had that experience. I loved her in a way I hadn't loved any being before. But for me, because that love wasn't genetic, it wasn't, because part of my DNA was out there in the world, but it was rather because I felt like the universe had gifted me this child and said, here, tend this. She's yours to care for maybe for a week, maybe for months. We don't know how long, but tend her. And that it was that responsibility for another human life that expanded my heart. And I think that what it showed me is that my heart is capable of expanding for any kind of being, and I think all of us are capable of that, and that we just have to listen for that here, tend this, about a mountain, about a refugee, about an asylum seeker, about our neighbor who has COVID, that all kinds of beings are crying out for our attention and our care, and can we answer them? And so that's one main thing. I think another is grief. It's been my most acute experience of grief, and it's made me wish I could be different towards friends who were grieving. I think so many of the ways that we talk to one another in grief falls flat. I think I had a friend who said grief is like another language, and you'll be able to tell right away when someone knows how to speak it. And that's very true. I think it's hard to be around someone who's grieving. So how do we tend the people around us who are in pain? What do we do for them? What do we say? And what feels good and what doesn't feel good. So I've come to understand myself as a person in grief. And I think that hopefully has made me a better friend in the future. I also think it's transformed my writing. I wrote Stranger Care as a love letter for my foster daughter. I wrote it because if I'm no longer allowed to mother her, I want to help create a world that will mother her, a world that will make her safe no matter where she is, no matter what her economic future is, no matter what her schooling is, no matter what her environment is, that she will be loved and well cared for. So part of that is creating a world where all the vulnerable are cared for. And so I started to understand my writing differently and what was required of me as a writer differently. So that's been very transformative. And then I think the last thing is I want to be a mother. I want to be a parent. Eric and I want to be parents. And so we're trying to figure out how to make that happen and what that might look like and how to do it ethically. And so those I think have been the most transformative parts of this experience for me.
Wow. Poof. Well, thank you, Sarah. What do we have to look forward to? And this is, I don't want to give up too much because I want to, I want us to talk about the Alliance and your work there and all the stuff that you're doing. And we're going to get there, and we're going to probably end up circling back to a number of things. Outside of the nonprofit work, which we'll start talking here in just a little bit, what, your book is coming out next year, which is next month. What else do you and your career and your business as a writer? What else do we get to look forward to? Is there gonna be already another project that you're gonna be looking to put together, or if somebody wanted to reach out to you, perhaps they want to learn from you, how does that look like? How does that work?
That's such a kind question. Thank you for asking that. I write full time, and I also teach writing. I help people write, and I don't do that in a university anymore. I do it on my own. So I lead monthly writing workshops. I do book coaching for people. I run something called the Word Cave, which is a 4-day virtual writing retreat. I help people create space and time to center what matters to them, to center their art. And for me, that's a kind of activism. I think art helps us practice the skills we need to remake the world. Every time we make a new sentence or a loaf of bread or a painting or a sculpture, we're practicing what it looks like to invent something new, to introduce something new into the world. And it shows us in a small scale what's possible on a larger scale. So I help support artists in their writing. I work with artists. I lead artist statement writing workshops. I lead these virtual retreats. And then I just launched something called the Word River, which is like ongoing support, because I think the biggest battle for artists is making that time, prioritizing that time, centering that creative work, because everything else seems more important. So that's what I help people do is prioritize that work.
Oh, that's really cool. And when do you have a website or anything like that that people can go and check out, what your availability is and like your calendar and what that looks like as far as those projects?
I do. I have a website. It's just my name, sarahsentilles.com. And I have a workshop tab, and it lists all the offerings there, and people can sign up.
Okay. I'm going to see if maybe Sweet Baby James are in the background as we continue to have our interview with Sarah. Maybe you can put up the website over there. What's the name of the website again?
It's just sarahsentilles.com. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted you to say it again. So yeah, thank you. Sweet Baby James, make it happen. So
Sweet Baby James.
he's wonderful. This guy moves my heart. He's just awesome. So nonprofit work. All right. So I get pretty excited about your work in the nonprofit sector, and I'm gonna do my best not to steal any thunder because I just want to start spitting out some games. So I'm gonna let you talk about it. I happen to know people home watching their devices, their computer or whatever, they don't know what I'm talking about. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now and what and the why. Why is it that you're doing it? Why is it that you consider this important work?
Yes. And as if we haven't touched on every single possible controversial topic, right? We've talked about religion, we've talked about war, we've talked about adoption, we've talked about foster care. Now let's talk about immigration. So I run the Alliance of Idaho, and Jaime is actually on our board, which is like the highlight for me of 2020 that he agreed to do that. I love it. And we started 4 years ago. We had 501c3 status through another organization called the Centro de Comunidad y Justicia in Boise, but now we're becoming our own 501c3. And we started right after Trump was elected president, and it became clear that the immigration policies that his administration were putting forward were going to terrorize people in our community. So we started by 4 women, and we wanted to help protect the human rights of immigrants. And so that's what we did for the first 4 years. We ran a hotline that people could call if they were facing an emergency or if someone in their family was facing an emergency, and we would connect them to ethical, low-cost legal services. So we did that for 4 years. We probably helped about 100 families in Blaine County. We ran Know Your Rights workshops. We had citizenship days. We had DACA days. We educated business owners about their rights and how to better protect their employees. But we kind of flew under the radar. We thought that it was important for us to keep a low profile so that we wouldn't endanger any of the people that we were trying to help. But then when the Black Lives Matter protests happened this past summer, after the killing of George Floyd, we really faced a reckoning about what kind of organization we wanted to be. And we decided to become bigger and bolder and more visible and more anti-racist. And we decided to go out on our own. So that's the incarnation that we're existing in now. We built a board of directors, like I said, that you're part of, that is majority Latinx. I'm running the Alliance now, but our director of community engagement, her name is Becky Lopez. She's going to run it in 6 months. I think it's important to amplify and center the voices of Latinx people. And I think it's important for us to be led by exactly the people that we're trying to support in our community. We are going to bring our own lawyer on staff to act as a case manager and to offer free office hours for legal help. We realize that the pandemic made visible this tremendous need for legal assistance in our community and showed that it's impacted by status. We expect there to be continuing need, even with the new administration. I think even more people are going to come forward and want to apply, whatever that might look like for them. We also want to create an incubator for Latinx leadership in our valley. We want to help bridge the trust gap. There's robust services in Blaine County, but a lot of people in the impacted communities don't feel like those services belong to them. So we want to try to be a bridge, whether we're talking about bridging people to the Hunger Coalition or to the Summer Symphony or to the trails here. We want to say this place belongs to you, and we can help you access whatever resources that you need. So we've become explicitly an anti-racist organization. We're trying to center Latinx leadership, and we're working hard to triple or quadruple or multiply by 10 the kind of impact we can have in our valley and the more people that we can help.
That's wonderful. There's going to be 12 questions coming at you now. But the first one, and this is the most important one, I think, because sometimes it just makes people feel uncomfortable. And this is a conversation that I've had already with a number of different guests. When an organization, such as a nonprofit or a business or an individual or a group of people, identify themselves as anti-racist, what does that mean? Because at times it can be heavily misconstrued. It makes people uncomfortable. It makes some people immediately say, "Well, I'm not racist. I don't have to announce it." And it's just, and that's a different rabbit hole. Just giving a little taste as to where I'm heading at with this, and also for everybody that is watching. Again, some heavy topics today. We're mixing it up. What does that mean? Being an organization that is proud to say, out and loud that they're anti-racist.
Well, I think in the culture that we find ourselves, it's not enough to be neutral about racism. I think that's what that shows. It's not enough to just say I'm not racist. I work hard against my own internalized racism. I've been fighting against my racism since I was in those classrooms in Compton. And that's been, I'm going to show my age now. How many years ago was it? 25 years ago, I was teaching elementary school in Compton, and it's ongoing every day. If you're an American, if you were raised in this country, and especially if you're a white American, you're racist. It's not that you are mean to other people, but you've benefited from the structures that have kept some people down and lifted other people up. And it's unconscious sometimes, the interpersonal racism, but more important, it's structural. And the work that we do at the Alliance only exists because of the racist structures that exist. There would be no problems for the people that we serve if there was no racism. So in order to be an organization that is supporting immigrants in our community and their human rights, we have to be against racism, internalized racism and structural racism. And it's like you can't be neutral on a moving train. You have to take a stand. I understand that it makes some people uncomfortable, and there's actually organizations in our valley that have lost funding as a result of being more boldly anti-racist or speaking out in support of Black Lives Matter. But I think the bolder organizations can be, you actually open yourself up to new sources of funding. There's people who are relieved to hear you speak those words. And that's what I'm more interested in, is how do we open up what we do. If people don't like that we're anti-racist, they don't have to support us. But there's, for every person that doesn't like that we're anti-racist, there's 20 who like that we are. So they support us. Maybe they're not going to give us $1 million, but they'll give us more money. And the other point, I think, at the Alliance is we're trying to make room for other organizations. If we can be on the edge, if we can push the envelope of what it's acceptable for organizations to be, then other organizations can follow suit and become bolder in their vision and their mission-driven work. So for me, anti-racist, it's funny that it makes people uncomfortable. Do you want to be pro-racist? Those are the choices. There's
right.
Either anti-racist or pro-racist. That's it. There's no other place to be. So we might as well claim what we're doing.
This is a tricky question. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that people are uncomfortable with the term anti-racist?
I think that it exposes the lies at the center of the way we imagine our nation. I think we have tremendous rhetoric about being the land of the free, but at its start was genocide and enslavement of one group of people by another group of people. And I don't think we've come to terms with that. And I think that we haven't made amends. We haven't repaired the violence that was done. In fact, we pretend it doesn't exist. So I think part of the discomfort is that shame. And instead of feeling shame, people would rather feel anger. So it's a move rooted in denial and self-preservation and in the myth of what this nation is. I think there's that beautiful publication that was put out by the New York Times called 1619. And one of the main essays in there is about this woman whose father was Black American, was also flew the American flag. And she makes the argument that it's Black Americans over and over and over again who have shown us what this country can be. And so we would do well by listening to their vision that expands what freedom is and who it's for.
Beautifully explained and beautifully said. Where can we go to learn more about the Alliance?
You can go to theallianceofidaho.org. I think it might just be allianceofidaho.org, where our website is being redesigned, so it's a little bit clunky right now, but you can go there. And there's information and also a contact and an email. You can send us an email if you'd like to learn more, or if you'd like to donate. We're having an end of year campaign, so I hope people will donate too.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay. Well, it is time for shameless self-promotion. That means, we're approaching towards the end of our hour. Usually we're the last in line for our time here at Argos, but today we got started, so we gotta adhere to the timeline. Again, I know you said it before, but perhaps somebody that might just jump on the stream right now, where can they learn more about you and your writing business and your coaching and all the workshops that you got going on, your books, and then yet again about the nonprofit work?
They can learn about that at my website, which is sarahsentilles.com. And my newest book, Stranger Care, is available for pre-order now. Pre-order really helps authors. So if you know writers, it's really important to pre-order their book. It makes a big difference. And there's also a tab there about workshops and classes that I run and retreats that I run. And then you can learn about the Alliance at allianceofidaho.org. And I will look forward to collaborating with you.
Wonderful. Sarah, I cannot thank you enough. You could have spent your time doing something way better than to hang out with me, but I really, really appreciate your time and then sharing your stories. Some of them very, wow, they're heavy stories, and I'm so glad that you're so willing to share with all of us, not just me. If you're watching, make sure you check her out on her website. Check out her books. They're wonderful. Incredible storytelling. Again, impactful stories make for impactful conversations. If conversations were there easy all the time, then they're probably not worth having. As always, I want to thank again my friends here at Argos Production. And if you are checking out the stream live, then you're on Argos Stream TV. Make sure you keep liking us on social media. Make sure you're supporting them. Or again, shout out at the end of every episode to Vital Elements. CBD products out here out of Idaho. If you like to support the show, that's one great way to do it. There's always the link on our YouTube channel, and it's always the link on our Facebook. Feel free to follow us on Instagram. And the same thing with the Argos Productions crew, Justin, Erica, and Sweet Baby James out in the back. So 2020 coming to an end, and the guests just keep getting better and better. Please make sure that if you are liking the content, that you go ahead and go into our YouTube channel, you punch that like button, that you subscribe to our channel. If you can support, and it doesn't always have to be money, you can always go ahead and share the content and just get it out there. And for probably the 20th time, Sarah, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being you and being willing to be involved and doing the kind of work and telling the kind of stories that most people will actually probably shy away from. It speaks tremendously about your courage no, excuse me, your character and the type of courage that you're carrying in your heart. I'm glad that we met this year. I'm glad that I'm on the board. Thank you for the invitation, and I cannot wait to continue to collaborate and work with you. For those of you watching at home, thank you so much for tuning in today. Check us out next week. It's going to be an awesome sauce episode. Yet again, I'm just waiting for some confirmation. And then the week after that, we're going to have the virtual beer tasting with Jacob Black out of Lost Grove Brewing here in Idaho. Thank you so much, guys. Love you a long time. We took a 2-week hiatus. It's just really, really good to be back. And again, when you get a chance, get out there and be kind to somebody. See you later, Idaho.